Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a Cyberpunk raid player that cringes himself out of the game, a story about a lawful stupid cleric, and much more. But before we get into those, here's Nipsey.
Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.
I hope they do that too, Nipsey. But with that said, let's get into these stories. Edgelord vs. Cringelord by Reddit user Madman Robbie. This was when Cyberpunk Red first came out, leading up to the release of 2077. Recently, I was chatting with a friend about a Red game, and this story shot to the front of my mind like a non-flashback of my time lost in the cringe. While they've made some edits to Red over the years, it launched in a weird state and still has not gotten what I would call proper support. No actual Borgware, unless there is a book I'm not aware of. When my RPG group decided to play, riding on the hype of 2077, we thought it was awkward, but were willing to give it a shot. Since one of our group had a friend interested in RPGs, but was new, he was invited to join us. This was Cringelord. We sat down to do character creation together, and while this was a while ago, I'm going to do my best to remember how he, in his own words, described his character to the Game Master in one long unbroken paragraph. He's a Yakuza hitman, but he's not actually Japanese, but they respect him because he's a badass killer. He also has a bunch of tattoos and scars, but they're style scars that he works into his tattoos. Also, he uses any weapon he can get his hands on. Rifles, shotguns, pistols, swords, and throwing stars. Actually, he doesn't use swords and throwing stars, since that's weebish. But he knows how to use them because he's in the Yakuza. Oh, but the Yakuza doesn't mind him working freelance, since they respect him. Also, he gets a lot of bitches, like hot Asian bitches, who don't mind that he's Latino. But he's also like cool and distant, the relaxed and strong silent type. Also, he only wears high-end suits and bling, but he keeps it clean since he's so good in a fight that he doesn't get dirty. And he drives fancy sports cars. While I was reeling from that wave of words, he and the Game Master somehow worked out how to make that into a character. I don't really remember how, since I was searching high and low for Borgware, and the closest thing Red has are these exosuits that you graft onto your body like in Elysium, despite being 25 years after 2020. The Game Master and I eventually decided to just say that Sigma Frame was a full body replacement, since we both thought the absence was odd, and I had taken the military sponsorship option for the new body, also something from 2020. My character was an NUSA grunt who fought nomad reclaimers, invading the ravaged Night City, then later fell into the Maelstrom since they were a cyber psycho gang in his residential area, so they kind of became his default gang option. Hilariously, I ended up making a heavy metal skinhead punk rocker like in the 2077 game, just based on the Red description, and thus the Edgelord was made. At this point, nobody in the party of 6 really thought anything of Cringelord, since we've all seen nuclear-grade cringe characters turn out to be awesome. Session 1. We get a call for a job. We need to meet a fixer in the combat zone for a heavy-duty recovery job. Now, my guy used all of his money to get borged, while basically living in a shipping container turned into an apartment unit, without anything else to his name. The Game Master then just has Cringelord come pick me up in his fancy sports car. This immediately goes poorly, as he is narrated in front of my home, only to then get this spiel about how he doesn't want Borg freaks in his car. I try talking to him in character about how he's going to get reduced to a stain in the combat zone, and a fancy suit isn't going to save him, so he needs a solo there. Everyone tries reasoning with him out of character, with the Game Master basically saying, "Dude, do you want to play Red or not?" And eventually, I just challenge him to a face down, since the Game Master suggested it as a mechanical solution. He loses, but he draws a gun instead of backing down. He fires at a -3, I think, barely plinks my armor. Then I just roll to drag him out of the fancy car and drive off with it. This just leads to him ranting about how cool his guy is, and how he wouldn't be afraid of a Borg, and he would never get carjacked, so he detonated a car bomb that he didn't actually have. And he was going to call the Yakuza, which he didn't have any connections to, and he was going to do all these things to get me killed that he couldn't actually do. Then he just screamed and left, and I've never seen nor heard from him again. The game master just said he got killed by Maelstrom while roaming around the neighborhood, throwing a fit. Sadly, the red game didn't go on very long, as we were all pretty let down by the system, and then 2077 came out and sucked, so the game master just lost all motivation to run the game or even swap to 2020. Well, OP's description of that player being a tad cringe is on point, I'd say. The part that got me was that his character could use swords and throwing stars, but doesn't because it's too weebish. Then when presented with the start of the game and the hook of Cringelord picking up OP, Cringelord becomes so unagreeable to the point that the game master plainly asked if he wanted to play or not. Then to say that he set off a car bomb after OP just takes the car reminds me of when you're kids and playing gunfighting, and one kid says that he hit the other kid, but then they're just like, nuh-uh. It's no wonder that Cringelord screamed and leapt like a child, because that's basically what he was acting like. It is a shame that the red game didn't go very long after, and the game master lost interest in it due to Cyberpunk 2077 being kind of a bomb. And I can relate to that, as I was really disappointed when I first played it. Though apparently Phantom Liberty fixed a bunch of stuff, so I may have to go check it out again. Let's move on. Lawful Stupid Player sacrifices himself to save a dozen bandits. By Reddit user, That Water American. We were exploring some ruins when we came upon a dozen bandits. These guys were a minor faction who attack you and steal your supplies, unless you buy a pass from them. We didn't have a pass, so long story short, we ambushed them and eliminated their whole camp so they wouldn't harm others in the wilderness. At the end of the fight, the cleric finishes the last enemy with a non-lethal attack and casts Spare the Dying to stabilize him. He then casts Spare the Dying on every bandit that we killed. The rest of the party said that they did not deal non-lethal damage, they were aiming to kill. The Dungeon Master rules that all 12 bandits are now alive and at 1 HP. I know that is not how Spare the Dying works. The cleric argues that it's morally wrong for us to fight this faction, and that he wants to question the bandits to learn their intentions. After a long conversation, the bandits only reiterated what we already knew. Then the party argues about what to do next. 2 party members wanted to kill all the bandits again, for fear that they would return to their base and put a bounty on us. 2 other party members felt like it was evil to kill the bandits again after the cleric brought them back. And then the cleric went in a completely different direction. The cleric wanted to get the bandits back on their feet and let them take him as prisoner. Then they would present him to their leader back at their base, 150 miles away. Literally 15 10-mile spaces on the hex crawl. He wanted to learn what the bandits' factions deal, so the bandits promised to take him back to their base. The Dungeon Master had our sorcerer do an insight check, which led to him casting Detect Thoughts. He realized that the bandits were lying, and would kill the cleric at the first opportunity, and disappear into the wilderness. The cleric then said that he was okay with dying if it meant that the dozen bandits lived. At this point, the Dungeon Master introduces a new voice among the bandits. This rando mocks cleric, and reveals the Bandit King's evil secret plans. That being that they allied with pirates, who we were hired to stop, to plunder ships coming to the area, and then they traffic the loot. Also, the Bandit King is a really bad dude. The cleric argues that the leadership may be corrupt, but it could be that the average bandits don't know about the piracy, and might just be good people fighting for what they believe is an honorable cause. So he pitches a new plan. When the bandits take him to their base, he'll use thaumaturgy to amplify his voice, and reveal to all the bandits that their leader is in league with the local pirates. The cleric anticipated that alone would make the bandit leader step down. He said this in front of the bandits who would be responsible for bringing him back, and he reasoned that they wouldn't kill him on the journey because they all heard the same secret and they are in danger, somehow. The dungeon master told the cleric straight up that if he does this, the character will die, but the cleric player confidently disagreed. The party got into an actual argument that almost ended with PvP, though finally the party walked away. The cleric then helped the bandits onto their feet, was placed in manacles, and went with the bandits in the other direction. That was the end of the session. In the post-game discussion, the dungeon master was really upset that the cleric threw his character away, especially because his background was tied to the endgame. He asked if the cleric was trying to play a new character, but the cleric said that he wanted to keep playing this character and thought that this was a compelling storyline. He asked to continue the cleric's adventure as a side story until he is freed, and then he'd rejoin the party. But the dungeon master put his foot down and said that the bandits are just going to kill him a few miles down the road, and that, even if they didn't, we aren't going to play out a side story of the cleric being a prisoner 150 miles away, while everyone else does the main adventure. TLDR. The cleric allowed himself to be captured by bandits so that he could reveal a Bandit King's plan to work with pirates to the Bandit King's underlings inside the Bandit King's base. The following session, the cleric came stumbling back to the party. He had an off-screen adventure with the DM where the bandits were attacked by a huge monster who saw a dozen 1 HP humans limping through the woods. The cleric was the only survivor. The DM then shifted his alignment from neutral good to lawful good. Well, what? So this player thought the best course of action was to revive all the enemies they just defeated and go with them to their hideout to inform them of the plan that they already knew? Not to mention, thinking that the dungeon master would take time away from the main campaign to facilitate role-playing well, the only word that comes to mind is idiotic plan. OP saying that this player was being lawful stupid is an understatement. Thankfully, it sounds like the dungeon master was able to course correct this with a short one-on-one session with the cleric, and have him return to the party beaten up. Let's move on. A couple broke up over an in-game relationship by Reddit user KeyEb8306. We are all in college, and I'm the DM. This story concerns a good friend of mine, Jack, and his girlfriend, Sarah, who were both players in my game. Initially, Jack wasn't into D&D at all, but his girlfriend is a big Critical Role fan, so she made him join as well. He made a goblin wizard who was crazy, and she made a half-elf cleric. The other players were a human fighter and a minotaur barbarian. From our second session, Sarah started flirting with the fighter, which Jack didn't like at all. He told her not to do so, and they both started arguing at the table. She started saying how she can't romance his character, as he is playing a goblin, and he started saying that she shouldn't romance in the game at all because it's weird. Even Critical Role was brought up, about how the people there don't care if their spouse romances other characters, and Jack said he doesn't care. I tried to calm them both, but Sarah stood up and left crying. Their relationship is now over, and so is our D&D group. Things like these are why session zeros are so important. That way things like this could be avoided. Though something tells me that if this was enough to have the couple break up, that relationship wouldn't have lasted long anyways. Hopefully, OP can find some new players to start up another campaign, this time without all the drama. Let's move on. We just wait for you to stop talking. Submitted to the D&D Doge subreddit by Reddit user TwalkLowell. So, this may be an odd story, since usually, horror stories are about problem DMs, ruining the fun for the group. But in this case, it was about a problem group ruining the fun for the DM, me. I used to be a dungeon master for a group of people, and I'll admit that I wasn't that good of a DM, but I was the only one who could even do it, so I tried my best. This wasn't easy to do, however, as the way this group played was so chaotic, it would make the Joker look lawful by comparison. If an NPC tried to give them a quest and offered a reward, it was a complete toss-up on if they'd just try to either kill or rob the NPC, rather than do the quest, or ignore them entirely. And this was for basically any NPC. Whether it was a farmer offering gold for hunting nearby wolves, a noble asking them to find his lost child, or a plot-important NPC offering them the MacGuffin in exchange for them completing a quest. It was a genuine struggle to actually have a campaign, as the party just seemed to want to murder Hobo around, so I dialed back even having NPCs, and tried having them just find plot hooks across the world, but they just tossed them aside. A badge with the symbol of the group that killed a player's family? Thrown out. A map of a hidden treasure? Thrown out. A sentient magic weapon that will lead them to slay a dragon for glory and wealth? Thrown out the second it started talking. I honestly should have seen that one coming. Even in the rare times that they would follow the plot hooks, they would return to their antics as soon as they hit any kind of obstacle. The biggest example of this was one time, they needed to get some rare metal that was only found in the mines owned by the Dwarven King in the Dwarven capital under a mountain, and only miners appointed by the royal family were allowed in. Now, by this point in time, I was used to planning out stuff to accommodate their unpredictable nature, so I had a lot of ways planned out for them to get the metal. Befriend the king and be granted access. Discover the mine's location and sneak in. Find and buy some on the black market. Discover that the metal is used in an alloy for jewelry and buy it all to refine the metal out. Stage a rebellion and overthrow the royal family to gain access. Collapse all entrances to the mountain to starve everyone and kill the entire population, so no one can stop the party from entering the mines. And a good handful more. And a few more. So the party gets to the city, asks about the mine, and learns it's inaccessible without permission of the royal family. So they make up their plan to get access to the mines, and it was to convince the king that one of the players was his long-lost son. None of the players were dwarves, and the player in question wasn't even a humanoid race. They didn't even come up with a story to tell, or a way to explain how the player wasn't a dwarf, or how the king even had a long-lost son. They just wanted to walk in and roll a deception check, saying, "I'm your son." They failed and just gave up on getting the medal. The campaign did continue after that, but I barely even remember it. I think I just stopped even trying to plan anything and just wing everything at some point. One thing I do remember, however, is a conversation I had with the players a few sessions later, where I voiced my grievances with how they seem to be intentionally avoiding following the plot of the campaign, and at one, saying that it feels like they don't even listen to me when I try to dungeon master. At which point, one of the players tells me, "We don't, we just wait for you to stop talking," and basically admitted to intentionally derailing everything I had planned, and never going along with anything. And because the idea of no D&D is better than bad D&D hadn't been ingrained in me, I actually continued DMing for them after that. At some point down the line, however, between the stress of trying to DM for them, stresses of my life in general at the time, and the stress of the pandemic, my mental health had declined, and I was starting to have outbursts of anger, which got me kicked out of the group. Looking back, it was honestly a blessing in disguise, since otherwise I'd probably still be playing with them. I've since found a new group who would like me to DM if our main DM ever can't, but that whole ordeal actually left me with DM trauma. Anytime I start thinking of an idea for a campaign and getting excited to run it, I eventually remember that last time I DM'd, and all of my motivation evaporates. Well, that certainly sounded like a nightmare group to run a game for. Honestly, after the first few instances of the party becoming hostile to NPCs for no reason, and not latching onto any of the plot hooks, OP should have said something. Though I can understand being new to something and just going with the flow, especially for those that have issues with confrontation, which I also used to have issues with. Though you can only put so much pressure on a stick before it snaps, and that sounds like that's what happened with OP. I guess the group saw that they could no longer walk over OP, so they just kicked them out. In which, I agree with OP that was more of a blessing than anything, as it led to OP finding a better group to play with. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.